Tēnā koutou katoa. I won't keep you from your lunch too long, I hope. So what I want to do today, this is my first biosecurity bonanza. So I'm going to just give a little bit of a quick overview of the Allan Herbarium, what we're all about, and then I just want to flag some of the research that we're currently doing, which is biosecurity related, just to give a flavour of what we do. Make sure you guys know who we are and why you might want to talk to us, I guess. The Allan Herbarium is the biggest herbarium in New Zealand. It's named after Harry Allan, who wrote Flora of New Zealand Volume 1, among other claims to fame. It's a collection of dried plants, in essence. There's a couple of collections of velvet leaf, the first record from New Zealand, and is that my, yep, first record from New Zealand, and from the recent outbreak. So yeah, a big collection of dried plants. There's some other dried plants. If you come to our herbarium, you'll find cabinet after cabinet after cabinet of dried plants. Of course, it's not just the plant that's important, it's the data associated with the plant, who collected it, where they collected it, when they collected it. If they were a good collector, what else was growing with it. If it was me, then probably just some link to a random bit of DNA. Of course, we're much more than a collection of dead plants. And one of the things we are is that we have modern databases and things associated with the specimens. So this slide is just to indicate that. Our specimen database is available online. So somewhere between a third and a half of our specimens have been databased so far. So there's still a long way to go in capturing all of that information. But for those that have been databased, we have tools and things to do things like give distribution maps and so on and so forth. So all of that sort of data associated with the herbarium specimens is available too. And that's really what the specimens are for, is they provide a permanent, verifiable record for that information. So you can check what somebody really thought, you know, what they really meant when they use a plant name, because plant names do change and the usage doesn't change, and you can verify what exactly it was that they actually saw and all of that sort of thing. So we are involved as a group in producing a lot of keys to plants. In particular these days, we try to focus on interactive keys that are more usable and for most users anyway than the old-fashioned paper keys. And there's a list of keys that we currently have available. Some of the authors of those are in the room, so Murray Dawson and Kerry Ford in particular have been involved in producing a number of these. So that's one of the things that we do is produce identification guides for plants, including weeds, including native plants. Of course, some things are very hard to identify, and if our products aren't doing the job in terms of keys and things, we will identify plants sent to us, and Ina Schoenberger is in charge of our plant ID service. She has standards that she likes adhered to in terms of what state the plant's in. Sometimes we do get a bit of decaying compost in a bag and somebody wants us to identify it. These are some nicer specimens. Well, we'll try. But, okay, so David Glennie here is one of our scientists, and at the moment one of his tasks is to produce one of these interactive keys to all the willow species, all the willows really, in New Zealand. So willows are particularly difficult botanically because there's all these hybrids and things, and they're grown clonally and they spread clonally and things. So David's having a fine old time trying to sort out just exactly what's here and how to differentiate the different types of willows. Jessie Preble, who's in the room, among her tasks, she's working on this group, the Celastraceae, which has some interesting weeds in it, like the Chilean baytan. So it's quite a long time since this group has been looked at closely botanically in New Zealand, and we think there are a number of species here that aren't properly documented. So Jessie is going to have a look at that. Jessie's working on an eFlora treatment. So these days, rather than focusing on printed paper floras, everything's online, in a digital form, and that's the main vehicle we use now to get out the basic taxonomic research that we do through our eFlora, which you can find on the World Wide Web. Kerry has been working on a couple of important weed groups. So the water lily family and Sagittaria and its allies, and those eFlora treatments will be up soon. Kerry also is an author of the interactive lucid keyed grasses, which, as Angela was saying earlier, are one of our major weedy groups. They're also rather difficult for most non-specialists to try and identify, and Kerry's really our go-to person for the identification of grasses. We don't just work on vascular plants, on flowering plants and so on, higher plants as we used to say. We have a great freshwater phycologist, Phil Novice, who works on freshwater algae, and in particular at the moment in a biosecurity context, he has projects working on Didymo and on Lindavia, the organism that's causing lake snow in some lakes, particularly in central Otago. And there's Phil with some pond scum. I try not to use that phrase, but he's not here. He, of course, is neither invasive nor a diatom. Okay, so a lot of our research is a bit more basic than just producing guides and keys and things, but in terms of biosecurity related stuff, I think Phil's provided us with some good examples out of our team about why this sort of research can be important. So in the case of Didymo, there was this hypothesis put forward that Didymo was in fact an organism indigenous to New Zealand, and the reason that we were having troubles with it was because of potentially changes in water quality or some other changes in the environment, which is, I think, something that maybe was viewed with some scepticism in New Zealand, but it's a legitimate hypothesis to put forward. So with Kathy Kilroy at NIWA, Phil has worked a lot on this and published I think some pretty compelling evidence to say that no, this organism wasn't present in New Zealand until recently. It is a biosecurity incursion, and we should treat it that way. Now, I've mostly put this thing up because it's preoccupying a large chunk of my brain at the moment. It's not strictly a biosecurity issue. Motivation for looking at these plants here, the Jersey cudweeds, is because one taxon made it into the Department of Conservation's draft threatened species plan, a thing called by some kettlehole cudweed, or Pseudonephalium ephemerum. It's a taxon I've always treated with a degree of skepticism. That would be it here. The whole thing about the Jersey cudweeds is something that I've been avoiding looking at for quite a long time because they looked diabolical and intractable. One of the things about this group is that they're, as a broad group, they're all around the world. Nobody's got a particularly good handle on them anywhere. So quite difficult to look at from just one part of the world. Another problem with them is that we have long suspected that there are introduced and indigenous strains of this thing here, and nobody's had a particularly good handle on telling them apart or anything like that. But we've had some success with this in the sense that I'm pretty sure that we can say with confidence now that yes, we do have introduced and native things. This is probably native. These redder looking ones are probably introduced. I can't quite believe it would be that convenient, but that really does seem to be stacking up. The red ones are the weed, and these are our treasured native taonga. So the answer is, we'll put this question here. Critically endangered natives or cosmopolitan weeds? Well, probably both. I'm still very sceptical about whether there's anything in this group that really deserves to be treated as a critically endangered species, but I don't have firm data on that yet. My first task has been to try and separate out the indigenous and introduced versions. So currently we treat all of these things under one name, and we will be trying to put a name on the indigenous thing that's separate from the introduced thing. But there are terrible fish hooks on the botanical nomenclature of these plants as well, which I won't get into. But going forward, we're really looking to ramp up work on the cultivated flora. So Angela talked this morning about the plants that had naturalised and those that weren't fully naturalised but were casual and so on. And Barney, I think, raised the spectre of the 25,000 or more cultivated taxa out there. Murray Dawson's really our cultivated plant expert at the moment, and we're looking to, as I say, ramp up work on this, have a project that's going to really tackle this issue of all of these cultivated only plants, which may be the next generation of weeds. Somebody, I think, also raised whether the increase in the number of naturalised plants out there is just finding and recognising stuff, or whether it's actually new stuff. Well, there are an ongoing flow of new naturalisations into New Zealand. Now, it's not my personal area of expertise, but I've worked very closely with people over the last 15 or 20 years for whom this is their bread and butter work. And some of the things that show up as new naturalisations are not plants that you could convincingly think just weren't seen for 100 years or whatever. These are big showy things. A lot of them are coming out of people's gardens rather than as failures in the border biosecurity system. But that said, no system is perfect. We have new things naturalising at a rate, and it won't be stopping anytime soon. But if we actually get a handle on what's lurking in people's gardens, then maybe we can make some progress on slowing down that rate of escape. And I think that's me.